as our Ready, Set, STEM event November 1st. Instead of our regular STEM Wednesday, we're going to be doing this next week at the same time as normal, except it's going to go for a full 3 hours, plus a bonus Q&A with our keynote. So it'll maybe last till about 7:15 p.m. if you stay for the whole thing. Hope to see you all there. Evan's dropping the link in the chat, and I see we've got quite a few participants rolling in for today's Out on the Trails event. So I will get started with some fun outdoor activities I've come up with. So while we're getting started, I thank you, Evan. You can stop screen sharing. And for everyone who is here, if you would just tell us what state you're coming in from, depending on, I know Jonathan's here from Florida, and he probably doesn't quite have the same level of fall colors as I do up in the Colorado mountains. So if you are not yet hitting full-blown fall, you have more time to do some of these activities. And the other thing I'd love to know is which types of STEM technology do you have or use in your school? Some of the ones I'm going to be talking about today are our LabDisc sensors, as well as 3D printed things. But I'd love to know who my audience is so that I can sort of optimize some of my ideas to that. So any of that, drop in the chat. I am actually seeing chat bubbles pop up on my screen, so I should see most of your comments as they come in, but Evan may pop in if you have any questions or thoughts to share, because he'll have a better view of it. All right, so getting started with my first outdoor hiking activity. And before I start actually moving, I wanted to set up an experiment on my LabDisc. So anytime I go out hiking or field trips, even if I'm just walking around a school outside, it's really fun to be able to use this and track all sorts of bits of data. So the first thing I'm going to do is make sure that I have rotated this blue, or whatever color your LabDisc has, cover around to reveal all the different sensors. That way they're picking up the data as accurately as possible. Then if you have the LabDisc carrying case, you can stick it in there. If not, I've just carried it in my hand and held it while I hiked, or even stick it in any sort of exterior pocket on a bag works as well. You just want it to have good ventilation. So you see that this has ventilation on it built into the carrying case, and I can still see the screen reading. And then the important thing is to, wherever you're holding this or putting this, that it's not likely to press too many buttons, or you might accidentally start and stop your recording by accident. Now, to set up your experiment, I have a tablet here, but you could also set it up right on the device. And I'm just going to click, I know my screen is terrible in the reflection here, but I click on the little LabDisc looking icon and can pick all the different sensors I want to run for my experiment. So for outdoor experiments, I do air pressure because I'm in a place with elevation changes. If it's perfectly flat, air pressure isn't going to do much for you. But anywhere like me with Colorado, air pressure, because you can do elevation, temperature, sound, GPS, humidity, those are all good things to track depending on what you want to study with your students. And then I'm going to hit the little runner man icon, and it will start collecting data. So as I go about my hike now, it will be tracking all these different data points for me. For now, I'm just going to tuck this, put it to sleep, put it in my bag, and get on the trail. Chat.
I haven't seen any either, Hannah.
Okay.
We do
How's
have a
the
question
weather?
from Preston asking how's the weather today?
Well, let me check the LabDisc. It tells me it is 73.7 degrees outside right now. I can see that on the screen here. So actually, it's a very pleasant day in Colorado today. Having said that, we're supposed to have snow on Sunday, so welcome to Colorado weather changes. But yeah, so thanks for asking that question. The LabDisc is going to be tracking all sorts of different things. Now, when I'm out here and walking around, I can hear a plane overhead. I'm sure my sound sensor is noticing that. And so while you're actually hiking, you can look at the LabDisc data, but I more prefer to look at it sort of after the fact as more of a Like, what did we learn? What did we see? All right, question in the chat. Are there any sensors? Oh, it disappeared. Evan, can you finish reading that for me?
I got you covered. Are there any sensors to avoid using when you are walking around? Does the movement mess with any data collection?
The one I have done in the past that I found was absolutely useless afterwards was the light sensor. And that's simply because if you're not holding it very steadily, it ends up moving with every arm motion. And it goes from really bright to really dark to really bright to really dark, and it's just a mess. So that's the one I've used on a hike before, thinking it'd be interesting, and then didn't really get much out of it. So that's one I avoid. External temperature is one to avoid if you don't have the external probe plugged in. So the ambient temperature will update more slowly, but will still give you good data. If you want more rapid temperature changes, you can do the external probe. So yeah, that's a really good question. Depending on which lab disk you have, like I wouldn't use distance, for instance. While it sounds like it might tell me how far I've traveled, that's more of just how far am I away from an object. So it's not going to give you the data you're looking for in that. The GPS, however, will actually show you where you've gone on a map, so you can figure out some distance data from that. Great question. Now I've stopped here because, let me flip my camera around. I have found, down here on the ground, this is an animal track. Now, this animal print appears to me to be a dog, not exactly the most wild of animals, but one of the other things I brought on my trip with me, let me flip this back around, camera. Sorry for some of the technical challenges of being on the move. But one of the other things I brought with me were 3D printable animal tracks. So anytime you're out hiking, keep your eyes on the ground and see what animals' evidence has been left behind. So maybe you are looking for different types of scat if you've been studying that, animal tracks, scratches on trees, all sorts of variety of things depending on your local wildlife. So if you did print, before you go out on these hikes, you can print out some local wildlife for where you're at. Now, I've seen deer in this park before, so I know that's an animal that is native to my area that likes this environment. And I'm actually going to be able to replicate a deer print using this 3D printed animal track. And the sand here looks pretty loose. A lot of our soil right now is really hard and solid packed. So since the dog print was able to work, I would bet that this one might too. All right, pointing at the ground. To leave an animal track, you simply line it up, push, and I can see a little bit of that indication here. It's a really bright and sunny day here, so some of it is not showing up as nicely as I would like simply due to the lighting. Ooh, that one showed up better there for you. So students love making animal tracks. You can have them practice different ones next to each other and talk about how the speed of the animals moving might leave a different type of a track, all sorts of things that, for instance, hunters and trackers use when they're out looking to actually get animals. So that is another fun way to do it. It helps if you've done some of this perhaps again in advance. That way your students know what to look for. So this could be an activity you do in the classroom with a little like desk-sized sandbox. This could be an activity you do looking at pictures and images first before you go make your own. And speaking of snow coming up, it is a great snow activity too, because the snow is the perfect foundation for leaving animal tracks. Now, if you're in Florida, you can, we have alligator tracks on our animal prints, 3D printable on my STEM kits. And I have been known to leave alligator tracks on a beach once just to mess with people. Used a pool noodle to do the tail line between the front and back paws. You know, just like a mildly problematic. Hopefully I didn't scare anyone. All right, so while you're walking along, anytime I'm doing any sort of outdoor activity, I want to be looking around me. So I mentioned looking out for animal prints that are local to your area. Preston asks, which other animals could you do? I'd say that's specific to your area. So in our kit, we have a lot of Florida animals because that was where I was located at the time I made that one. And we also have a lot of sort of generally found in the US animals. So Sasquatch print, that's hilarious. Someone just put that in the chat. But we have like a squirrel. Squirrels are everywhere, so you could do a squirrel print. We have, let's see, bear prints. We have alligator prints. We have ducks and owls and all variety of animals. So it's a really good chance to talk about animal attributes as well. And then when you're outside, if you see various plants, if you see tracks like that, take pictures on your students' devices. And afterwards, you can add them back on to your LabDisc map as an image, because we have annotation and image tools in the GlobiLab software. Oh, I need to slow down. Hiking at elevation while talking is not something I am the most accustomed to. Normally I have someone talking back, so I take a breath in the middle. So speaking of plants and animals, here are a few I happen to know local to my area. This is a yucca. It's very stabby, but having students identify and understand their local ecosystems. This one in the background that I've been seeing a lot of are scrub oak. So scrub oak is practically a weed here. It grows so well and so prolifically. And then we also have a bunch of, pines. So you can talk about coniferous versus deciduous, all sorts of things depending on what's found in your area. Now, if you are doing this in, say, a city park, maybe you don't have access to a mountain right near your school, you can still compare differences in different types of plants found in the park. So I'm going to grab one of these little scrub oak leaves. Okay, question. We don't have that much diversity here. Are there any 3D printable leaves or seeds? Okay, we do have a breathe. We do have a 3D printable seeds kit that has a variety of seeds you can print out and use with your students. And actually, one of our guest speakers at next week's Ready, Set, STEM has written a blog on how she uses these 3D printable seeds kits. So if you go to blog.mimio.com and search seed in the search bar, you can actually find a sample lesson plan for a middle school science class that uses those. Now, about leaves. We don't have any 3D printed leaves yet, but that question is great because it actually leads me to the next idea I wanted to share with y'all. So, all right, phone, don't tip over on your tripod here. Stay. Okay. Got to get one more thing out of my bag for you all to see. So I picked up a scrub oak leaf. I went for one that is still a little flexible, simply because I don't want it to get destroyed in my pocket if I'm a student. I want to have a leaf that is still fresh enough to not completely disintegrate in transit. And then what I would do with my students, you've probably done, has anyone here done leaf rubbings in the past where, you take a crayon and a piece of paper and you sort of trace what the leaf's patterns and such are? Well, I have a variation on that is kind of fun for integrating a 3D printer. So this morning, I went out into my backyard and found a cottonwood leaf. And I wanted to keep it safe because that one was a lot harder. So I've stuck it in a box here. And as soon as I get the box open, here we go. Here is my cottonwood leaf that fell off one of the neighbor's trees. And so this cottonwood leaf, a way to sort of modernize the concept of a leaf rubbing, would be to have your students go into tinkercad.com and you can use the scribble tool to actually have the students draw the leaf to match one that they found out on a hike. Now, all right, the loud truck has passed. Now, I wouldn't expect most of your students to probably turn out something quite like this. I have an art background, but if they're looking at the main details, what is the basic shape of the leaf? Does it have squiggly edges or very smooth, round edges? So using your description terms, and all they have to do is draw it in 2 dimensions, and they end up with a 3D object that this printed in about 15 minutes because it's only 3 millimeters thick. So you can actually send your students home with a cool project that doesn't take that long to print, but is also not that tiny. And so I also would integrate like measurement with this and have them try to make it the same size as the leaf to then be able to, let's see if I can line it up, make it a life-size replica of the leaf. Now, even mine doesn't line up perfectly. Tell your students you won't expect it to line up perfectly, but it's a fun way to talk about how different types of trees grow different size leaves, what the leaves are used for, integrate it back with all of those different sort of life science standards. If any of you have good, fun fall projects that involve leaves, please drop them in the chat. I would love to hear ideas for any sort of fall or outdoor themed activities from you as well. Evan, how are we doing on time? It seems I don't have my clock up here.
You're doing just fine. You're 17 minutes past the hour.
Okay, perfect. I have one more section on my hike I wanted to show you with another good idea. And I know I can get to that in the next 3 minutes. All right. In the comments, we have leaf press art was always a favorite. Is that like putting a leaf in clay or like documenting it in a more permanent manner? Or more like the leaf rubbings? Leaves, a stamp. Very cool. Yeah, actually, the 3D printed things would make for a fantastic stamp. You could actually have the students paint them in different fall colors or put them with ink and then stamp it on paper to make art. I don't know if that's what you were thinking, but it prompted the thought here.
Judging by the chat since then, I think that's exactly what they were talking about, making a stamp to paint with the leaves.
Awesome. I am seeing the next item I wanted to talk about, which is landforms. So mostly I've just been surrounded by forest, but if I had hiked longer, I would run into some very interesting rock formations, including this guy. So he's a very small rock formation at this park. We have some much bigger ones, but I knew I had good signal here. And so when you run into anything interesting like this geologically, the perfect chance to sort of take a moment with your students and try and figure out how something like this would have formed. And so what I would do, low-tech version, is have them model it with clay. So they could just make a clay replica of some interesting rock formation or landform that you could either see on your hike or see on your trail. Maybe it's kind of like this mini hoodoo type structure here. Maybe it's a mountain like I have hiding behind that hill, or a ravine, or whatever landforms you have, preferably rock. It's a little harder if I guess if you're going to use clay, you might have to use multiple colors if you're bringing in like water with landforms. Talking about lakes and streams and rivers that might do better in flatter locations. But what I would do to integrate the technology component on this is again use that scribble tool in Tinkercad. And you could actually have the students go layer at a time and build up, like they just sort of draw the shape, the outline shape of this as if it were kind of like a relief sculpture. You stack it up, you slice it in layers, just like a 3D printer does, and you make the formation a layer at a time. So that's a fun way to tie it back to how 3D printing works, and a really interesting way of creating a sculpture. It's a different way of thinking, and it has up on art integration, as well as getting your students to really kind of start thinking in 3 dimensions. It'll be a challenge, don't get me wrong, but it'll be really interesting. All right, well, we are at the 20 minutes. I'm going to switch my view to the chat and see what folks are saying. Oh, a 3D pen would be great for that. If you have questions, please just drop these in here too. All right, someone's 1-year-old's class was using leaves with paint on them to make stamps. Fun. Awesome. All right, I think I actually caught most of the other comments live. Evan, would you drop the Tinkercad link in the chat just for anyone who needs that for me? And then you've heard reference to a couple of our 3D printable kits. Those all come down to, they're on mystemkits.com, which is where our 3D printing things are. And I just wanted to pull up the lab disk and see how my data is looking. My goodness, it is a lot of data right here. The sound sensor particularly is causing a lot of up and down data versus my air pressure. I didn't hit much elevation change here. It's sort of a straight flat line. Humidity moved up and down as I wandered around my trail, so lots of interesting things. Evan, do we have any other chat questions? I closed the chat to pull up the lab disk.
Yeah, we did have one just come in asking how the lab disk does with analyzing soil samples.
Oh, yeah, that's another great thing to do outside. That is a great suggestion. It does all right. What you need to do is you get some distilled water and you actually take the soil sample and put a little bit of it in the distilled water and let it soak up all the properties of that soil for about 15 minutes. And then you can actually use the pH probe with the lab disk to get the pH of the soil. We've just recently written a lesson on this in my STEM kits. So if you're interested in doing soil sampling or comparing water quality samples out on your hikes as well, you can find information on how to use a pH probe in the lesson plan. It is called Soil Samples and pH. Great question. Thanks for asking. All right, anything else coming out? I see you put the link in. Thank you. Oh, how durable is the lab disk? Well, let's just say I drop things more often than I should, and it hasn't died yet. No, actually, the lab disk is really solid. It has even gone up into near space on a weather balloon and come back down safely. We love to tell that story. There's a really cool YouTube video if you go on to the MimioSTEM YouTube page and look around. So we have some really cool success stories of people doing some crazy things with this product. So it can definitely withstand a classroom environment. It can withstand being out on hikes and so forth. Can even withstand near space environments. Oh, perfect, Evan. Thank you for, he just listed the soil lesson plan as a link. Now, if you don't have a MyStemKits account or you're not logged in, you'll have to create an account for that link to work. But if you already are logged in, that link will take you straight to the page. And if you need to create an account, you can simply go and register for a free trial and then search for the word soil. And that should show up under Browse Lessons. All right, everyone. I don't think we have too many other questions, but I'll stick around for a second. Thank you all so much for attending. And if you missed it, next week, we are not doing a normal STEM Wednesday. We are doing an amazing Ready, Set, STEM event that is featuring loads of guest speakers. It'll start at the same 4 p.m. Eastern time, but it will go for a full 3 hours with a whole bunch of 30-minute sessions. So pop in and out, see the different ones. It is going to be an amazing experience, and I can't wait to watch all the sessions. Thanks so much for joining today.